Hi everyone, welcome to our latest Chart Your Path podcast episode. Today for Volunteers Week 2024, we'll be talking about how to find time to give back. So today you've got two speakers. You've got myself, Alex Marsh. I'm one of the co-founders of Charter Path. Talk a bit more about Charter Path in a moment, but just for background on myself, I originally trained as a chartered accountant. And alongside my professional career, I also now sit as a charity trustee, school governor. I'm also actually the chair of trustees for Charter Path, as we're now a registered charity. Really pleased to say, joined today by Jordan Hart, who is a former colleague of mine, actually, and he'll be sharing some of his experiences as a volunteer as part of today's session. So over to you, Jordan, to quickly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Alex. So hi, everyone. So my name's Jordan Hart, and I've been working at Charter Path for coming up to 6 months now. So I lead on all things analytics and insights. So whenever I'm donating my time, I'm always thinking, how can we use data and insights to help try and encourage more finance professionals to volunteer their time and connect finance professionals to charities. And then I've got a full-time role at Klarna as well as an analytics manager supporting within the investor relations area.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jordan. Looking forward to hearing more about how you are finding time to give back. So in terms of what we'll cover over the next 30 minutes, it'll be a quick introduction to Charter Path, just who we are, for those who aren't familiar with what we do at Charter Path. But then really importantly, looking at different ways to volunteer your financial skills and what that can mean in terms of different time commitments, depending on the role that you pursue. Really importantly, we'll talk then about why you should make time to volunteer, and particularly what are the benefits for you? What do you get in return for giving your time? Then I'll hand over to Jordan to share his experiences as his real life volunteer story and what it's been like volunteering his time with part of the team here at Charter Path. And then we'll wrap up with some tips on how to find time for volunteering. So some practical advice if you are either pursuing or you are in a volunteer role in terms of how to make time. Now, we're doing this particular episode or podcast episode as part of Volunteers Week 2024. Just wanted to say a few words as to why we here at Charter Path are supporting Volunteers Week 2024, celebrating its 40th year actually. So first established in 1984, originally run by an organisation known as Volunteering England. And why has Volunteer Week continued and why is it so important in its 40th year? We are in a situation, sadly, where levels of volunteering have been in decline. So if you rewind around 10 years ago, roughly 25% of UK adults regularly volunteered their time. Fast forward now to the most recent survey stats from 2022, and that's dropped to 16%. So a huge drop. So that equates to 5 million less people volunteering their time. So that can sound a bit doom and gloom. I think the positive is that actually more than half of the UK population are getting involved in some form of informal volunteering. So that could be volunteering down at your local park run, something that I love doing. But obviously that's, is a bit less visible. But what Volunteer Week 2024 are trying to do is to encourage more people to get involved in regular volunteering and help support the charity and non-profit sector. So loads of materials on Volunteer Week 2024 website. You can find out resources, particularly for your specific region of the UK, and ways to get started and get involved in volunteering. So that's why we're supporting Volunteering Week and trying to do our bit at Charter Path to encourage more of you with financial skills to give your time to charities, schools, and community groups. So let's crack on. Quick intro to Charter Path for those who don't know who we are. So myself, Alex, I co-founded Charter Path with my friend and former colleague, Alice Clementi. We originally trained together as accountants many, many years ago, makes you feel ancient, nearly 20 years ago at PwC. We're really fortunate then to carry on our professional work in life together for, I think, nearly 10 years, went on to work together at Close Brothers. And actually, as well, we were at Close Brothers that I got involved in volunteering for the first time, actually reading with school kids in Tower Hamlets. So although it was just a couple of miles away from the city, it was an absolute eye-opener. Seeing kids, 10, 11 years old, really struggling to read books that, back home, I was fortunate, reading with my daughter Isabel at the time, who was 5 years old, reading the same books as these kids who are, 10, 11 years old. So really struggling, and, you could see the kind of knock-on impact that could potentially have on their lives. So really rewarding to help them and see their reading improve so quickly. But it really gave me sort of an insight into some of the challenges that people all up and down the country are having, particularly young people, and prompted me to then become a school governor. the finance link governor, so particular responsibility for finances. And that was really just the start of then, a very happy volunteering career that I've had as a trustee and as a school governor, still a school governor now, 8 years on. But it was actually, Alice and I were doing some fundraising while we were at Close Brothers, 24 hours, 100 kilometres walking along the Thames Pass. See the picture there. We were smiling at this stage. It was earlier on in the walk. And that's when we were talking about the volunteering that we were doing. Alice also was as a trustee of a charity at the time, and really thinking about what could we do to encourage even maybe just one more of our friends or colleagues with financial skills to volunteer them with charities and schools and community groups. And actually founded Charterpath in 2020, so a few years later, after seeing firsthand the financial impact of the pandemic on the non-profit sector, and particularly the schools and charities that we were supporting. So fast forward now, the mission here at Charterpath is to significantly increase the proportion of finance professionals who volunteer their skills to the non-profit sector, currently estimated at around 10%, and our aim is to get it so half of finance professionals volunteer at least 2 days a year in terms of skill-based volunteering, bringing those financial skills to the sector. We strongly believe that finance professionals can help answer the financial challenges facing the non-profit sector. When you look at the 10% who do volunteer, actually look at the 90% who don't. Actually, 5 in 10 do not volunteer due to having available time, or perceive that they don't have available time, or due to work commitments. And that's why today's session we're particularly focusing on how you can find time and help encourage 5 in 10 to get volunteering. We can do that, we'll get to the 50%. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is ways to make sure that you can make time and balance volunteering around your work commitments. Just briefly, what we do at Charterpath, 3 ways that we're looking to try and chart that path between non-profits and finance professionals. Firstly, inspire, really targeted at finance professionals, trying to encourage and inspire more of them to volunteer so they understand a lot of the benefits to them, part of what we'll be discussing today. But actually having built that community of finance professionals, helping to connect non-profits with that community. Often charities can really struggle to reach finance professionals, so we're trying to make that easier for them to reach volunteers with financial skills. And then the last piece around the engage aspect to our mission is really about how can we engage the wider kind of sector or industry to make volunteering really just a standard part of what it means to be a finance professional. So that's working with employers to encourage them, for example, to support you with time in your work day to volunteer, but also working with institutes, for example, to encourage more training and understanding of the non-profit sector. And we've had great success over the past 3 years. So we've built a community of over 2,000 finance professionals, supported over 200 non-profits that we partner with to help them find volunteers. And really importantly for us, now contributed over 15,000 volunteer hours to the non-profit sector, the equivalent value of over £500,000. So, a lot more to do, but really exciting progress over the past couple of years. And really exciting news, in recent months, we've become a registered charity. So I'm sure that's going to open up even more opportunities for us to support. So let's quickly talk about some different ways to volunteer your financial skills and what that can mean in terms of the different time commitments. So we've got 4 buckets here of different roles. I won't go into them in a huge amount of detail. If you go onto our YouTube channel, search for Charterpath on YouTube, we've got really detailed sessions actually on each of these different roles. But just to give you a whistle-stop tour on what it means in terms of different time commitments. First off, let's talk about what it means to be a charity trustee. This is a bit like sitting on the board of directors of a company, but sitting on as a trustee or a board of trustees for a charity. So really it's about being responsible for governing the charity and directing how it's run. Responsibilities include for those trustees, ensuring the charity actually delivers the benefit that it kind of commits to, its purpose. Obviously that it's compliant with all relevant laws and regulations. And then really importantly, and where financial skills come into it, making sure that the finances are managed in an appropriate way. Within that aspect of trustees, a sort of sub-role, and we wanted to include this because it can be a bit of a barrier to understanding, is the treasurer role specifically. This is a bit like the FD or the CFO of a charity, with particular responsibility for the financial oversight. So often they'll sit as a trustee, but specifically have that role. But that includes then obviously financial management, but also financial compliance and also financial reporting. So it could be, for example, oversight of the preparation and sign off of the accounts of the charity. Then you have school governor, again, similar in a way to a trustee of a charity, but this is specifically being a governor of a school. So every school in the UK has a governing body and they're responsible for overseeing the management of the school. Responsibilities similar to for a charity, looking at the strategic direction of the charity, making sure the head teacher is held to account, and then looking at the financial outcomes of the school, making sure that the budget balances in terms of the income versus the cost of running the school. And then the last bucket we have are financial volunteers, tend to be like a newer area that's evolved, where these are specific roles where a volunteer with financial skills can support, maybe on a more of a one-off or an ad hoc basis project work. Could be that you sit on a subcommittee, so rather than being a trustee, you could sit on the finance committee of the charity. Could be helping to write bids, it could be helping with fundraising, could be doing an independent examination like a mini audit of charity, or simply just being the mentor for maybe the finance lead in the charity. Now, all these different roles have different time commitments. In terms of trustee, treasurer, school governor, these tend to be what we call recurring roles. So they'll have a certain number of meetings, whether it's trustee meetings or school governor meetings each year. Quite often that could be monthly, could be quarterly. They tend to be often in the evening to fit around your work commitments, which can be helpful, and that you tend to have a schedule for the year ahead. So very helpful in terms of getting them into the diary early, but tend to be recurring formal meetings. And then you need to put time in between meetings to maybe, if you're responsible for the finances, maybe go and meet with the head teacher and the business manager for the school, for example, to go through the budget in a bit more detail. Could also involve, for example, chairing the finance committee if there is one. Financial volunteer, the real benefit of this area is that these tend to be more project-based, for example. So it could be helping a charity, for example, with a specific task. Maybe they're putting in a new system, they're moving from spreadsheet across to using a Xero type tool. Also, interestingly, this area, it could be both in the UK, but can also be overseas. So it could just be a 2-week project, for example, overseas, helping a small charity overseas, for example, just to do almost like a financial health check and make sure that their finances are in good condition and they have the right controls in place. So hopefully roles there gives you an insight, different roles, but ultimately lots of scope in terms of the varied time commitment that might involve. Now, briefly linked to that time commitment in different roles, lots of different types of tasks. And again, we'll cover this very briefly today, but types of tasks really range from very hands-on tasks. So it could be doing actual bookkeeping, could be doing reconciliations, all the way through to very much more the review and oversight. You could be sitting on an investment committee, making decisions about what, grants, for example, the charity should, give out. For example, I do that. I sit on the board as a trustee of ICAS Cares, so the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. They're a benevolent body where we make grants to people where, unfortunately, their lives taken turn for the worst and they need support. We only meet 3 to 4 times a year, and those meetings we issue grants to people who apply to the organisation. So again, fits nicely around my other commitments. So that just gives you a whistle. Huge amount of tasks, but I think the positive from the variation in tasks is that can vary then in the time commitment, but also it can vary where you are in your professional career based on what skills and experience you have. So there is something, I would say, for everyone. Now, next up, why should you make time to volunteer? So you've got an insight into the types of roles, but what are the benefits for you? Why should you prioritize volunteering versus other ways that you could be spending your time? So we'll quickly talk through that. So at CharterPath, we believe that volunteering your financial skills is a win-win-win. So what do we mean by those 3 wins? First off, it's clearly a win for the non-profit sector. So, we've talked about the financial challenges that charities are facing. For example, 6 in 10 charities have seen a reduction in the donations that they've been receiving over the past year. Not that surprising with the cost of living crisis that's happening. But the knock-on consequence of that is, particularly alongside the financial challenges that people are seeing in their lives, 25% of them are seeing an uplift in the demand for their services. So you've got an increase in demand, but reduced income. Absolute challenge in terms of their finances. So bringing in a volunteer with financial skills can help those charities build financial resilience and make that sort of P&L balance for them. I think importantly for charities, often struggle to recruit individuals with financial skills, can take up to 12 months to recruit. Right now, today, there are over 100,000 trustee vacancies currently being recruited. And the number 1 skill in demand right now is financial skills. It used to be marketing skills and digital skills, but I think given the financial pressures from both the pandemic and then more recently the cost of living crisis, the number 1 skill set in demand right now is financial skills. So if we can bring more people with financial skills to the sector, it's a huge win for the non-profit sector, increase financial resilience, ensure that more charities are able to navigate their way through the financial challenges they face right now. So that's the first win. Next up, let's talk about you. What's in it for you? Now, often you hear a lot about, number 4 there, making a difference. And that's obviously the starting point. People often talk about, why do they get involved? And it's often a cause that they feel passionate about, want to make a difference, maybe find some sense of purpose alongside their professional life. And that's absolutely valid. But I think it's really important to recognize that there are also many other ways that volunteering can be a benefit for you, hard benefit for you. So first off, develop your skills and CV. This is an opportunity for you to both hone the skills that you do have, but also develop completely new skills in a safe environment. So think about it as free CPD for you. 80% of volunteers report improved communication, influence, and relationship skills from volunteering. And that flows straight into the second item there, growing your network. As a trustee, for example, you'll get to meet really interesting people from all different backgrounds, all different skill sets. Can open the doors to future career opportunities that you never even expected. So a brilliant way to grow and build your network earlier in your career, particularly. And then really importantly, improve your well-being. And that shouldn't be missed. I think we've seen, the deterioration in sort of mental health levels over the past couple of years, particularly following the pandemic. And actually volunteering has been proven to improve your well-being. And just to dig slightly into that, I love this graphic on the left, talking about the health benefits of volunteering. So better, well-being, increased life satisfaction and self-esteem. My particular favorite, though, is reduced brain shrinkage. Not something that I aspire to. And if volunteering can help avoid that, I'm all in. But beyond that, some hard stats. I know how finance professionals love hard stats. 77% of volunteers agree that volunteering improves their mental health, and the knock on them into their day job. For example, 68% reported greater motivation and 26% reported improved productivity. So huge wins translating from your volunteer career across to your professional career. And then let's talk about the final win then. It's a win for business. So a win for your employer. So I encourage employers to support volunteering as part of their benefits offering to you. Volunteering has been proven to promote retention and engagement, boost reputation and trust of organizations, and really interestingly, create more business opportunities by showing what your organization stands for. Linked to those first two items, 87% of employee volunteers had an improved pride in their employer. So where they're supported to volunteer by their employer and are utilizing the offering that maybe their employer gives them in terms of maybe a couple of days a year to volunteer, report improved pride in their employer. So worth really pushing, your employers support you to volunteer as well and get them on site, support you to make time and realize the benefits of that. So hopefully you've got an insight into the win-win-win that volunteering is. But enough of me rambling on. I'm going to hand over to Jordan. I've known Jordan since he was 18 years old. He was a young boy then. He's now a grown man. It's very awesome to have you join today, Jordan, and to be part of the Charter Path team. But I'll hand over to you to share kind of your experience and real life story of volunteering. What I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment just so that you could appear in big for this piece.
Hey. Great. Thanks, Alex. And thanks for the great background as well to volunteering. So I think we started our conversation about me joining Charter Path about 7 months ago. And at the time, I was actually already looking for a volunteer role to donate my time to. And it was specifically a role that I was looking for within sort of dementia, Alzheimer's charities, basically, because it was a cause that was really close to my heart. And when we started having the conversation about me being able to join Charter Path and use my skills to not only help just those types of charities, but a whole range of other charities, it was, that led me to know that this was the right opportunity for me to donate my time. And I think that's probably one of the key reasons how I'm able to actually find the time is because it's actually a cause that I'm genuinely interested in. So when we're having our sessions or whenever I'm doing the analysis when it comes to Charter Path, it's not like a chore. It's actually something I'm genuinely interested in. So I think that's one of the recommendations. It would be to find a cause that you're actually really passionate in, and then also finding the cross section of it being a role that you find interesting, because in general, everyone has the things that they enjoy in their day-to-day role, things that they perhaps don't enjoy. So if you're able to find a role which allows you to work on the areas that you're particularly good at and you're particularly interested in terms of the actual type of work, combined with an organization or a charity that you're very passionate about, it's just the perfect combo, so that when you are donating your time, you get real good satisfaction. I think that's probably the reason why we're seeing some of those stats around the improvements in mental health and well-being. So yeah, that would be my main recommendations. And I think more specifically in terms of how to find time, I would say to align with your managers who you're working with. I mean, when I approached my managers, I was blown away about how supportive they were. They've been so supportive around me being able to say join this call, being able to do that alongside my day-to-day role. So I would recommend, really aligning with your managers and getting their support. And then when it comes to actually trying to find the time specifically, I try and block out specific windows of time on a monthly basis where I would dedicate, say, this whole specific hour to CharterPath. And I think knowing that on the first Saturday of each month, I'll block out a time from 8 till 9 in the morning to then get some CharterPath work done. It's a bit like a routine when it comes to the book close for finance professionals that they're aware of. Having that specific dedicated time slot really helps keep that routine going and helps keep yourself accountable to actually being able to donate your time.
Brilliant, thanks, Jordan. And what you've been doing it for 6 months now. Do you feel like it's become more rewarding as you kind of have got more involved? I know that that's often what people say is kind of the start. It can be a bit like you're finding your way, I suppose. But now you've been going for a bit longer, more kind of set.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely was the case, because conceptually, whenever you join a charity, you understand obviously what their overall purpose is, and then it's only when you're sort of 2-3 months into the role that you're actually being able to proactively add value to the charity, and that's, I think, probably the reason why it improves over time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's one of the benefits, actually, ultimately, I think, of recurring roles, in terms of, if you can get through that first stage, in terms of, often people do start with maybe sort of ad hoc volunteering, but transition through to recurring. But what the recurring side, I think you can add more and more value, because once you understand, like you say, the activities that are actually being done, it goes beyond just being sort of a technical exercise of, doing the finances or the accounts of the charity, to being actually you're influencing the activities, the plans, the strategy of the charity. So yeah, it's been very good to have you involved, Jordan.
Yeah, and following on to that point as well, I think where finance professionals can add a lot of value is when it comes to when you first initially join a charity, there's probably going to be a lot of like legacy processes that maybe aren't as efficient.
Yeah.
And I think finance professional can jump in, create efficiencies, automation when it comes to some of these different processes. And then in the next sort of phase of your volunteering journey with the organization, then you can add even more value when it comes to the different insights that you can provide, more from that strategic level.
Yeah, and that is absolutely, Jordan, a perfect descriptor of what you've done at CharterPath. So you've come in, you've really helped us in terms of fresh pair of eyes, and in terms of looking at what we're doing on the analytics. And then now you've got that kind of running like a machine, getting more involved, and kind of more suggestions as to activities. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing your experiences. That's awesome. I'm just going to share back my screen, so I'll get back onto here. There we go. Should all be back in action. So I'm just going to finish off with a few more tips on how to find time for volunteering. So let me just quickly click through these. I mean, I love this because it kind of puts it into perspective here. So 8,760 hours in a year. Couple of stats in terms of how we use those hours. So Brits on average, equivalent of 10 whole days a year cleaning their homes, miserable 237 hours. This one though, staggering. Netflix subscribers in the UK tend to spend on average 3.2 hours per day on Netflix, or 1,150 hours per year. Now, let's put that into context versus the typical average hours that it takes to volunteer as a trustee. We talked about that in terms of the number of meetings per year, but on average, around 30 hours per year. So all we are asking, of you, in terms of becoming a trustee, is give up maybe 1 or 2 box sets in a whole year, in terms of 1 or 2 series in a whole year, translate that across to volunteering your time instead. Or even better, just give up the cleaning 1 day a year. Absolute winner. Just let it go. But I think it's really important contextually to realize that, because often that kind of in your mind, you build up that the volunteering commitment will be that much greater than it is. And actually, on average, it's around 30 hours per year. Now, really important in terms of that time commitment, because it can vary, there are some tips just to quickly share in terms of making sure that you do find the right volunteer for you. So let's start with both the finding. As Jordan's touched on so eloquently, really important at the starting point is to find a cause that you're passionate about. If you find something that you believe in, then actually it's much easier in terms of giving your time. It's enjoyable to give your time. Another tip that we give here can be, finding something local. I think where you can see, particularly say a charity that's like, service users and delivering like in your community. For example, for me as a school governor, the school I support is just around the corner. You can see the benefit in terms of you can see the young people in the area who are benefiting from that school or that charity, for example. So that can really help you in terms of that motivation. Next up, just really important to research, ask the right questions before you commit, do your research, speak to for example, the previous treasurer if they're stepping down, understand, why they're stepping down, what the time commitment has been, what support you will receive. So really importantly, that kind of fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Like it's really upon you to do the right research like you would for any other job. Now, increasingly linked to that finance volunteer option that we talked about, earlier in terms of different types of role, really an increasing option is to almost try before you buy. So that could be volunteering as a one-off, so just helping with a piece of a project, getting in touch with a local charity, a cause that you're interested in. If you offer and say, look, I could give you 10 hours over the next couple of months, they'll bite your hand off, I'm absolutely sure. So that can be a great way to kind of try out a charity, see what it's like in reality. But also there's often the option to, for example, observe a meeting before you commit as a trustee or as a school governor. So it can be quite a nice way to really get at least an insight into different personalities at play, their priorities, where they're at as an organisation. That way, you could be confident before you commit your time to it that it's the right role for you. Just then, in terms of once you've secured a role, your time is precious, and to everything that Jordan just said, that scheduling your time up front is really important. It avoids that stress later. And what you'll find as a volunteer is that charities, schools, community groups are very understanding that you'll have ebbs and flows in terms of your available time. But actually, often they will give you a calendar, for example, of meetings a year ahead, as I touched on earlier, so you can plan those in way in advance in terms of working them with your your employer at your day job to fit those in. And then, yeah, in terms of then, I do very similar to Jordan. I have scheduled time in my diary for my different sort of charitable commitments to make sure that I'm well prepared for meetings and avoid that stress. One part I should flag about sort of that next piece, patience is a virtue. It's really important to recognise that charities, you know, they often are very understaffed. We talked about the financial challenges, and you do need to appreciate the challenges that nonprofits face. That could be, for example, they're not responsive as you might expect in terms of versus what you might see in your professional life. It's really important to make sure that you understand the culture and the challenges that the charity you're supporting, and you show a level of patience and understanding and empathy. They're often, like I say, very overworked and trying to balance all the different requirements, and often are very much focused to those end users of the charity. So as a trustee or as a school governor, make sure that you do respect that and you respect their time as much as you need to respect your own time. And then lastly, in terms of supporting you, particularly if you're in a role and your time, and avoid that sort of reinventing the wheel, is to really tap into all the support that is available. Often, charities and schools will support with onboarding to make sure you build your understanding quickly and you have a smooth entry into the charity. But it's also, there's so much resources out there, and linked to resources. One more tip that I will share is the shameless Charter Path plug that I always include in these podcasts. And that is, one last tip would be make sure you do join the Charter Path community. Over the past 3 years, we built a community of over 2,000 finance professionals, and you can be part of that community. It's a really interesting, diverse, engaged community. Many people new to volunteering, so 2/3 new to volunteering. Really equal gender split, and really proud actually of the sort of ethnic diversity that we've built into the community. So a really welcoming group. Would really encourage anyone who's not already a member or signed up on our website or following us on LinkedIn to get involved and join the community. That way you can access the newsletters, the exclusive events, the volunteer roles, and all the other resources, whether that's mentoring, for example, that Charter Path has on offer to help make your volunteering a success and help you find time to do good. So just one last piece from us, rather than just take my word for it. I've got a short video here from Laura Walker. She is a member of the Charter Path Advisory Board, very experienced FD, really experienced volunteer, and hugely inspirational in terms of how she finds time to volunteer. And just want to share a few short words from Laura to close out today's podcast.
Hi, my name is Laura Walker. I'm a trustee of Citizens Advice in Leeds and Older Citizens Advocacy in York, and I sit on the Charter Path Advisory Board. So to give you some top tips about how to find the time to volunteer. I think my first tip is, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. So you can always find time. Think about how you might be able to prioritise, do different things. So, one evening a week, maybe don't watch that box set or doom scroll for an hour and invest that in volunteering. Could you use one of your lunch breaks a week and use that time to volunteer? Or maybe you could get up an hour early once a week and invest that time. There's lots of different ways, and if you're passionate and prioritise, you can find a bit more time. The next tip is, does your company support volunteering? So often companies do employee investment days where they'll allow you to take a day and volunteer in that way. So that's a great idea. And then the other thing to think about is flexible working. I'm really fortunate. I've worked part-time 3 days a week for the last 8 years. And a big reason I do that is to be able to create the time to volunteer. I actually set up my own company supporting organisations to implement job sharing because I was so passionate about the power of all the things you can do when you work flexibly. But my biggest piece of advice is just find a cause that you love and you'll create the time. And I also think manage your energy, not your time. If you do volunteering, if you get involved in a charity, you'll really enjoy it. You'll get loads of energy for it, and that uplifts you and allows you to find the time to do other things.
Amazing. Who just played that, Jordan? Given the answer to the whole session. Amazing. Laura is actually incredibly inspirational. It's worth checking Laura out. Laura Walker, follow her on LinkedIn. She's co-founded the Job Share Revolution, an amazing organization encouraging more people to job share. So definitely worth checking that out. But yeah, huge thanks to Laura for making that video. So let me just click on. We have had some questions pre-submitted. So I'll let me just quickly go through those. So one question that we've had come in actually when we went out on LinkedIn to ask for questions was around specifically, I think this question came from Sarah, was around what to do in a situation where, you have sort of something really crunchy comes up at work and you are struggling to find time. You already say volunteering, but you're struggling then to find time to volunteer. And I think that's one way. I mean, I've had that experience myself. I was chair of governors for a school during the pandemic, and we had to shift to hybrid teaching. Lots of sort of ad hoc one-off meetings, sort of that 1 in 25 year scenario that we talked about in our sort of business continuity planning suddenly was actually happening. And I was chair of governors, and was at the time UK CEO for Klarna as well in my professional life. So hugely challenging time. And it was really interesting actually, because I think what my piece of advice in that situation is, it goes back to just really transparent communication. I spoke to the head teacher, I explained some of the, challenges I was having from a work requirements in terms of trying to manage what was happening to the retailers that we were working with, etc. And it was really great actually. The advice I had from the head teacher at the time was really kind actually. It said, ultimately recognized that what I was doing was a volunteer, and even just that 1 hour that I could give them, they appreciated, and I should never feel guilty about the time I couldn't give them. And I think that's one part which I think is really important. It can feel easy to sort of feel guilty about what you can't do rather than recognize the difference that you're making from what you can do. So I think that's really important. The other piece of advice I'd say for this one is that, linked to Laura actually in the job share revolution, is that there's an increasing trend towards job sharing in the voluntary sector. So for example, if you're the treasurer of a charity, being co-treasurer with someone else. And we've had very good success actually at the school I'm involved in terms of recruiting a number of finance professionals where we can share the load. And that way it isn't just, the responsibility doesn't just sit on one individual, and that, if one of you has to step away, you can kind of share that through. Don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share for that, Jordan, from your experience. I appreciate, your volunteering experience is shorter over the past year, but anything else on that from a sort of practical perspective?
Yeah, I think it really would be just echoing your first point around not putting too much pressure on yourself to be able to attend every single meeting. And what I mean by that is don't let that fear of not being able to attend a meeting because, say, work crops up or things get busy. Because if you're able to attend 9 out of the 10 sessions, for example, in terms of your role, like that's a huge impact. And just like not being able to attend for one session because work gets incredibly busy isn't the end of the world, and the value that you're going to bring is still going to be a massive net positive for the charity.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Another one here actually, which has come in, Kemi actually provided this question, which is definitely worth us covering, was around when you're sort of getting into, and it'd be really good for you to comment on this one, Jordan, but when you're getting into volunteering and you're doing that research piece that we touched on in the tips, is how do you, there's a perception at least that the time commitment will be greater than maybe that is sort of portrayed or explained to you, maybe in a sort of job description or equivalent. So what advice would you have around the due diligence to do in terms of understanding the time commitment? And yeah, it'd be helpful in a way to bring that to life maybe from your side, Jordan, in terms of, your experience of joining the volunteer team at Charterpath and kind of what you did to make sure that, you went into it with your eyes open, but equally it was manageable.
Yeah, good question. So there's probably a few things you can do. One of them, I think you touched upon it very briefly, is speaking to previous volunteers.
Yeah.
So I knew the person who done my role previously to this at Charterpath, and I was able to connect with her to understand the time commitments and what the real day-to-day role would look like at Charterpath. And I think that gave me a lot of reassurance that I was going to be able to have this role and it would be manageable alongside my my professional career. And then I think the other thing that should be done would be to just ask the right questions as well to the charity owner or whoever you'll be reporting to. If you're asking, if you're very clear in terms of what the deliverables are, that will allow you to understand what commitment you would be. And you can always scale up in terms of what the responsibilities are as well. So you could, they might require a breadth of work being done. But even if you're able to support on one small aspect, scale that up if and when it is more manageable. So that would be my advice.
Brilliant. And then one last one, which I'll take. I think this one came in from Karim, was around, just sort of to paraphrase it, was around, if you are volunteering and it is sort of overwhelming in terms of the time commitment, sort of steps or advice that you can access there. And I think on that one, Karim, I think some ultimately, if you think levers that a charity could access in terms of finance support, you've got employed resource the charity can have. You've got pro bono resource that they can access that could be from a corporate, a sort of an accountancy firm, for example. And then you've got often then volunteers, both ad hoc and recurring. So it could be treasurer, but it could also be project. And I think one piece of advice linked to that, linked to some of the previous roles that we talked about earlier in the session, is to almost do that gap analysis, and to lead on that. So rather than being, as finance professionals, rather than being a sort of a victim of a situation that's challenging, is to get on the front foot. So linked to what you said, Jordan, it's almost to have that sort of what are the tasks and having that build up that sort of inventory of the activity, and then work out what are, the sort of the best resources to use across all. And I think often you can find in the non-profit sector, unsurprisingly, because finances are challenging, are that whether you, for example, reach the tipping point where you need to have like dedicated employed finance resource, often that can come almost after the point where you originally needed it, because you're sort of reacting to the situation. But I think if you can take that proactive route of almost like looking at that gap analysis of skills and resource gap analysis that you have, it could just be that you need another trustee with finance skills. It could be that actually you need an employed person. But then once you've done that gap analysis, map out and say, look, what are the best routes to try and fill those gaps? And that's something that we've been looking at actually at Charterpath as part of a tool we're building, a non-profit health check tool, is exactly that. To almost give you the template to undertake that, so it can be undertaken in more of a objective way, because often it can become quite subjective and emotional when you're in a situation where you feel a bit overwhelmed in terms of the tasks. And often if you can find the right solutions, I've had this where, it was really challenging when I was chair of governance, for example, but actually I saw through my term, and I now sit as a member of the governing body with responsibility, for example, for careers development. It is less of a time commitment and I am able to balance it. So I'm still involved with the school, which I love, but actually the time commitment is a bit more manageable than it was when I was chair. So there often are kind of solutions if you can do things in a kind of a structured way and back to the communication. So I think just time permitting, we'll wrap up on questions. Just briefly to finish up today's session, just to say, thank you for everyone who's watching this video and has enjoyed the materials from today. We've got a number of events coming up that you can access from CharterPath. So particularly a couple I wanted to flag. So we've got a couple of what we call masterclasses. So a chance to hear from very experienced volunteers. 2 topics we're covering. One is about a problem shared is a problem halved. So actually particularly looking at how you can, link to that sort of job share piece from Laura, how you can, leverage other resources, skills, tools to help you in your volunteering life if you are already volunteering. Very interactive session. And then the second masterclass is actually about how you can translate your volunteering career actually into the boardroom. So actually how volunteering can be an entry point, for example, into non-exec director roles. That's a topic that many of you have been asking about as part of that kind of skills development, but also future career progression. Just so you can access all of those on Eventbrite. So if you search for CharterPath on Eventbrite, you can access those to attend either in live for the live recording, or you can access them on our YouTube channel now. So it's so exciting. We've got Eventbrite and YouTube channel. So you can access all of our events, including today's session on our YouTube channel. We'll be promoting previous episodes across our social channels. So I think from there, just want to finish by saying thank you to everyone who's watched the episode, but also a huge thank you to you, Jordan, both for being part of the CharterPath team, still working with me in a voluntary capacity, and for talking about your experiences and joining us today. It's been really great, really good to see you. Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks, Alex. It's been great.
Brilliant. Right, guys, see you soon. Join us for a future session. Thank you very much. Bye.